Well, welcome to today's webinar on developing a multi-site mindset. We're excited to share this conversation to help you really navigate the complexities of going multi-site, and then also share some key insights into what we've learned from working with literally hundreds of churches on this. My name is Sean. I'll be your host today, and I've been on the team here at the Unstuck Group since 2017. Currently, I serve as the Director of Consulting and help churches discover the best step to address their headline challenges and then develop plans to address those issues. Before we get into today's content, I want to introduce my co-host, which is Amy Anderson. Amy has been on the team here at the Unstuck Group since 2015 and currently serves in the role as Managing Director. During her time here at the Unstuck Group, she served over 200 churches, helping them design ministry strategy, staffing strategy, and multi-site strategies that fuel their mission. Amy, good to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And this is such a fun topic. You know, Sean, I cut my teeth in multi-site 20 years ago, and we learned a lot from our first launch. I've shared this story before, but our church, we didn't plan to go multi-site. In fact, we were just planning to move our church about 7 miles down the road. But 6 weeks after we opened our new building, we were full. And so we decided to open our previous building, and that slung us into being a multi-site church. But we made so many mistakes. First, we didn't put a campus pastor or even a campus team in place. We just kind of rotated staff through to go and cover that location each weekend. So needless to say, it took a while for that location to really find its identity again. But eventually we figured out that it needed a campus pastor and a campus team. Then 2 years after that, we launched our third location, and it was through a merger, or really like an acquisition. And we did it a lot better this time. We built a much stronger team of both staff and volunteer leaders to lead at that campus. And we actually did it too well, because that 500 seat venue that we reopened, we had 1,100 people show up. And that launch taught us, like, we need a bigger boat for future expansion. Yeah. Sean, you've been a part of multi-site launches as well. Did you learn anything?
Of course we did. Yeah. For me, this is one of those, I'm similar to you, don't do what I did topics.
Yes.
I've been a part of several campus launches that were healthy and went great, but also several where we made some of those missteps. We launched too small. We launched in a really poor location. We didn't do our due diligence on the campus pastor that we hired. We didn't fully embrace the mindset of one church and lived in that, what we call that messy middle, trying to keep certain leaders on our team, I think, because of that. And a couple of those campuses ultimately failed. And I think this is a good thing. They failed pretty quickly. But the good news is the average multi-site church now, Amy, has embraced this strategy for 10 years. That's the average. And that's a decade of learning for any church that's now considering going multi-site to really lean into. You don't have to make the same missteps that other churches and churches like the ones that I've been a part of have made before. Yeah. So, Amy, before we dive in, could you tell the listeners just a little bit about why we decided to talk about this topic today?
Yeah, well, in our Q1 2025 edition of the Unstuck Church Report, we shared that of churches that average 1,000 people or more in attendance, over half, 54%, are now doing ministry in multiple locations. Yeah. And on average, those large churches have 3 locations, including their original location. And then in addition, the number of mid-sized churches also increased. They increased to 22% this last quarter. So in total, 25% of all churches surveyed are now multi-site. So this strategy is continuing to gain traction and grow in adoption. So we're talking about it today because of what you just mentioned, Sean. We continue to see churches making the same mistakes over and over with multi-site, and we want to help our listeners today to help all of you avoid those pitfalls while building a strong foundation for success.
Absolutely. And as you listen today, we're going to push you towards a decision. And specifically, here's the decision that we want to help you make. We want you to commit to developing a true multi-site mindset before you take any more steps down this path. And we're going to teach you how to do that through today's conversation. We're going to approach this in 3 specific steps. First, understanding the multi-site mindset and what that is. Second, assessing your readiness to go multi-site. And then third, the non-negotiables for launch. Before we get into that conversation, though, of course, we're here in Zoom together. So we have the chat function in Zoom. We have the live Q&A function. Chat is for comments as we go through the conversation with other listeners and with our team. Tiffany, Amy, myself will be engaged in the chat channel. So if you have questions or comments in there, we'd love to see them and answer questions that you might have. But you may also have questions that would be best served in the live Q&A portion of our webinar at the end of today's event. So if you have those questions, use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen and input the questions there, and we will use those later in the event to go through those as Amy and I field some of those questions together. If you haven't yet downloaded the workbook for today's conversation, you can get that at theunstuckgroup.com/workbook. That's a /workbook. And then if you're on social and you'd like to share today's conversation, 2 places in particular, one, X, formerly Twitter, and then also Facebook, use the hashtag #UnstuckChurch. So just hashtag #UnstuckChurch to make any comments that you have, to share the conversation on social. We'd love it if you do that. All right. Amy, let's jump into step one, that multi-site mindset. We're going to start just by addressing what we mean when we say multi-site mindset. This isn't just about opening new locations. It's about creating a unified approach to ministry across multiple contexts. So what are some of the common or most common mindset shifts that churches need to make when transitioning to multi-site?
The first one I would say is you are shifting from one location to one church in multiple locations. And now that's pretty obvious, but let me explain what I mean. One church in multiple locations means we have one unified vision. We have one shared mission, and our ministry strategies and weekend experience, they feel the same. We're all part of one church, the same church. And we're launching to leverage the personal mission fields of people connected to our church who live in that community. Mm-hmm. So if there's people on your leadership team who want to go to a new community that will require different ministry strategies or that will reach a different mission field, the one you're already reaching, then you have the wrong mindset for multi-site. Yeah. That's really more of a planter. So that's the first one that comes to mind. The second mindset shift is really moving from this personality-driven leadership to a team-based leadership model. You know, in a multi-site model, you'll need to shift from a dependence around a single charismatic leader. Instead, you need to do things that build team-based leadership into everything you do. So this means establishing a teaching team. I think the best practice is a 3-person team that gives each of your communicators, right, enough ups to really drive the excellence in the teaching. And the lead pastor is still the lead voice of those 3. But I just find when you have an additional 2 communicators, it just increases your reach into the congregation by bringing more diversity, to the communicators. Yeah. Also in a team-based model, there's a senior leadership team, right? A group of 4 to 6 leaders, no more than 8, who are making strategic decisions. And then the organization overall stays strong, and we have strong campus teams and central teams and cross-functional teams. It's all of this team-based stuff that really binds together a multi-site church staff.
Yeah. And Amy, let me add to that too. One of the shifts is moving from staff-driven to volunteer leader-driven. And yes, maybe I should call it from staff does the ministry to staff equips others for ministry, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about this shift all the time at the Unstuck Group, but for a multi-site strategy to thrive, staff really truly have to focus on training and empowering and coaching volunteer leaders to lead. Multi-site is about multiplying your mission, and ministry leaders, you have to multiply the number of ministry leaders that you have as well. It goes all the way back to that Ephesians 4:12 principle, right? Staff need to be champions of their biblical role for equipping the saints for the work of the ministry rather than doing the ministry themselves. And while we have a lot of volunteers who are doing ministry, we also want volunteer leaders that are really feeling ownership of that ministry personally. And there are people in our churches with incredible leadership giftings. So we need to do the work of identifying them and then also giving them real responsibility and authority, whether it's leading small groups, whether it's leading all of guest services on a weekend, or being a teacher in our kids ministry programs. With this specific mindset shift, healthy multi-site churches really have doubled down on creating a leadership pipeline that's a clear pathway for volunteers to move from serving to leading with ongoing training and mentoring all built in.
Yeah, that's well said. That's key. It's a key shift. And maybe the last shift I'll talk about is just the shift into a matrix organization mindset. Prior to becoming a multi-site church, everyone probably had one boss. Decision rights were probably pretty clear. But as we shift from one location to multiple locations, we have to shift into this matrix organizational perspective, which means that we have to really talk through now who has authority over what in the organization and over whom, and to be clear on who has influence in a multi-site church. Mm-hmm. Strategic decision-making is typically held by whoever is named the strategist for that ministry. And it's often the leaders at the sending location who are those strategists creating the strategies, and then they're leading them or executing them at the original location. For example, the next gen pastor who's over birth through 18 at the sending campus is probably leading the decision making on how the church is reaching and discipling kids and students. but
Yeah.
the kids pastor at this new location is executing those strategies and then just providing feedback to the next gen pastor. And then at the campus, and then the campus pastors who are leading their teams to execute those strategies, they are the ones who have authority in this matrix structure. In other words, campus teams report to that campus pastor, but they're being influenced by the strategists at the sending campus. So all that to say, you need to bring clarity, right, to who makes what decisions. That is just one of the most critical steps in getting ready for multi-site.
That's really good, Amy. I mean, those 4 points right there are gold. And I think you and I both know, because we've been through this and lived through this, how important those headlines are right there. Mm-hmm. We've gone through them pretty quickly in the conversation right now, but those are 4 huge headlines for churches as they embrace this shift. I wouldn't underestimate how important those things are. And in fact, if you're considering going multi-site, maybe when this webinar video releases in a few days, go back and watch that again, because Amy, what you outlined right there is absolute gold and really, really critical for these churches to understand and embrace. What specific challenges have you seen, Amy, when churches haven't properly aligned their ministry philosophy across all of the locations that they have?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the biggest mistakes we see is that churches are not clearly defining what needs to be constant across all locations. And John, I think a visual will be helpful for this one. Mm-hmm. So what you're looking at here is a blank chart. It's called Multisite Spectrums. And it's a discussion that we lead all churches through in our multi-site process. And the discussion is to make advanced decisions about what's going to be identical or constant at every location. You can see that on the left-hand side there. And then where might we allow some autonomy? Now, when you are truly one church in multiple locations, you're going to put most of your marks on the left side of that. You can kind of see we're rating it 10 all the way down to 1. You're going to see a lot of things in that 8, 9, 10 side. Mm-hmm. If you're a church planter, if we were just planting a location, but we're not calling it one church, multiple locations, because you, again, want to reach a new mission field, then you're going to be more on the right side of this chart, where you're going to give lots of autonomy in how that leader can do their ministry strategies. Now, here's what I commonly see when a church is already multi-site, but they are stuck, meaning things are not working. Maybe it's financially, maybe it's relationally, whatever it is. As we work through these conversations with those churches, it turns out a lot of their answers land in that middle section. They're kind of in the 4, 5, 6, 7 across the board. Maybe they're a 10 like on finances, right? They want to have this financial operational support when it comes to doing ministry. But then they want this long leash in order to make their own ministry decisions. And so when I see a lot of scores in the middle of that chart, I used to call it the messy middle. I'm now calling it Death Valley, because those churches, it just never seems to end well. So there are benefits of being either identical or autonomous, but we can't choose that middle. It's like we're not hot or cold. We can't have the best of being identical, the benefits that we get from that, and we can't have the best benefits of being autonomous when we're just trying to live in the middle. So let me share an example of a church that I recently worked with and just how they process through. So you can kind of see on this chart where they landed with how they're running their current multi-site. And this picture just explained to them why they're having such a hard time right now in running their multi-site model. So they're in a decision time right now. They have 2 options, right? We can either release this location and kind of plant it as its own church now and give it obviously much more autonomy, or we can try to move all those blue dots over to the left side and bring them in line with what we're doing. And by the way, you can do that, but you have to take into account how long you've had that location, how much that new culture has already been embedded into that location. We say all the time, it's always easier to release things to more autonomous than it is to start and pull it all back. Yeah. So if you're already multi-site or you're getting ready to launch for the first time, these are the kind of advanced decisions you need to make, and then you need to communicate them to your team. And again, I would say, if you have not launched yet and you're living a little bit in the mindset of the middle, that is now Death Valley. choose which way, go one way or the other, but you can't be all things, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And Amy, the story that I shared earlier about my personal experience, Death Valley is a great way to describe that. I don't know, maybe great's not the right word, very appropriate way to describe that, because of the campus launches that I was a part of that ultimately failed. And again, they failed pretty quickly. It was exactly what you've shown on this chart. We were living in the messy middle in so many of those other areas, along with making some other mistakes in regards to location, that type of thing. And because of that, leadership was confused, decision-making was confused. Ultimately, the people who we were trying to reach were confused. And it just doesn't work. So my personal story, we have lots of anecdotal evidence from churches that we work with. And I think it's so important that we share that, because if you're listening today and you're considering going multi-site, please hear us on this. We want you to do it well. We want you to launch strong. And living in Death Valley right here won't get you there, unfortunately.
Really hot there.
It is very, that's right. So in your workbook, take a moment to rate where your team is now on your multi-site mindset scale, anywhere from 1 to 5. How far has your team gotten in terms of adopting this new mindset with clarity and unity? I'm going to give you just a few minutes, if you're on your own, to just kind of think through that and plot it in your workbook. If you're with a team, to have a quick conversation about that. We'll actually maybe do about 30 seconds, and then we'll be back with step 2. All right, so we're back with step 2, and this is all about assessing your readiness to go multi-site. Amy, I wonder from you, based on your experience with working with well over 100 multi-site churches through this, what are the most crucial kind of readiness factors that churches discover they're just not prepared for when going multi-site?
Sure. Again, I think a visual will help. So we're going to put up our multi-site readiness checkpoints. So while we walk through each of these readiness checkpoints with multi-site teams, the 2 biggest concerns we typically encounter are staff capacity. That's number 4 there, staff leadership capacity, and number 6, volunteer strengths. And let me just break down separately why these are such crucial factors. So staff leadership capacity. The principle here is that the right leaders are required to replicate your culture. It's your people who carry culture. So when churches are looking to launch and support a new location, you really need to inspect, does our staff have the leadership capacity to do that? So here are some questions we discuss when we rate this category. We ask, do you have leader of leaders on your staff versus gifted specialists? In other words, Sean, you were talking about this earlier. Are our ministry leaders leading and equipping others to do ministry, or are they doing the ministry? One objective way that you can assess this is by understanding what your staff to attendance ratio is. That's the metric that says we have X number of people in attendance for every 1 full-time equivalent on our staff. So the benchmark here is 75 to 1, meaning that healthy churches hire 1 full-time equivalent for every 75 people that attend their church on an average weekend. So run the math here to kind of inspect, do we have equipping leaders or do we have doers? Because if your staff ratio is around the 50 to 1 mark, then you are probably overstaffed and not equipping enough volunteers and volunteer leaders, right?
Right.
So another question related to that is, what is your volunteer leader to attendance ratio? Are you at the benchmark of having 1 volunteer leader for every 10 people who attend your church regularly? And if that number's like 1 to 20, it might mean you're not giving enough ministry away yet. And when we're not, the staff is usually getting maxed out, right, in their leadership capacity because there's not enough people engaged in the ministry. So bottom line here, what we're getting at is like beyond giftings and abilities, how is your staff margin? Can they add more? Or do we need to take some time to develop our pipeline and maybe prune some ministry first?
Let me add before you move on, I can just imagine right now that in the chat section, a lot of questions are showing up about what is a volunteer leader.
Yeah.
So the way we define the volunteer leader is it's anyone who's leading a group of other people, two or more
Hmm.
other people. So think your small group leaders, your kids ministry leaders, anybody who's leading a group of other people. That's who factors into that metric.
That's great. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this webinar as well. Getting to number 6 there, volunteer strength. And again, of course, it's closely related. In fact, if one of these is red, the other one is probably red. But the
Hmm.
principle here is that new campus launches require deep benches, deep volunteer benches.
Yeah.
And so you're evaluating, do we have a high level of involvement on our volunteer teams? And do we have a full and defined leadership pipeline? And that we're bringing people along and getting them developed at all levels along that. So again, people carry culture, and you need a strong core team to serve not only at this location, right, the one you're going to, but you're going to have to backfill all of these positions that just vacated from the sending campus. So
Right.
the objective numbers that you can look at here to kind of say, is our volunteer strength healthy? Healthy churches have about 50% of their average weekend attendance serving at least once a month. The average church right now, still recovering from the pandemic, is at about 35%. So it's been slow to rebound, but I think you need to know where are we? And by the way, the good news about volunteering is that, I don't know, Sean, if you experienced, I see it all the time, that when you launch a new campus, it just draws out so many new volunteers in your congregation.
Yes.
So that's a good, product of it, but you want to have a healthy bench before you launch. Another objective metric to evaluate this one is what I mentioned just a minute ago, which is that benchmark for that 1 to 10. Do we have one volunteer leader for every 10 people that attend our church on the weekend? So lastly, let me just talk about the pipeline for a minute, but have you developed a leadership pipeline that you can actually measure? So do you know how many volunteers you have that do singular roles, like they usher, they greet, they check our kids in, right? And then do you know how many team leaders you have in volunteer roles? And just to piggyback off what you said, Sean, this is where I'd say this is where we start to count them as volunteer leaders. But these are people who are modeling for others how to do the ministry. So I often use the example of, let's say you've got an usher team lead for the first Sunday of the month. So this person is there the first Sunday of every month, still ushering, but taking the leadership, and the other volunteers are taking the cues from them. This is how we usher here. Okay. So again, these are volunteers who are modeling to other people how we do ministry. And then we have a third level, which is called the coach level in place. And these are volunteer leaders that are actually recruiting and building teams of volunteers in the ministry they're leading. So again, it could be someone like an usher coach who's really providing direction to all the usher team leads who are modeling for ushers how to ush. So this coach, by the way, probably reports into your connections director or whatever your hospitality role is. But that's just an example of what the pipeline looks. And it should be spread out through all of your ministries. Kids should have a pipeline like this. Groups should have a pipeline like this. Where are we plugging volunteers into our pipeline? Do you know that? And are you developing them at every level?
That's really good, Amy. One simple exercise we used to do in my church to kind of assess where we were with our volunteer pipeline was just to create a matrix on a spreadsheet, just a simple Excel spreadsheet. We would list out those levels that you just went through: staff, coach, leader, volunteer. And then we would look at every available position over the course of a month. And we'd start filling in real names of the volunteers on our team. And what that would help us to do was understand how many volunteers did we really have who were serving at least once a month. And then in addition to that, how many gaps did we have? Because we wanted to have a full, like you said, a full bench. Sometimes our bench was a little too full. That was actually a good thing. It meant we were prepared and ready to launch a new location. But in order to get eyes on that, we just used a simple spreadsheet and built out a matrix. So that would be one very easy step that a church could take to get a glimpse, kind of a view on what their pipeline looks like currently. Amy, I wonder what other metrics churches should be looking at to just really evaluate if they're truly ready. Any other metrics stand out to you?
Sure. Attendance growth is a metric you should be paying attention to. Like, are you growing? Because here's what we know. Health and growth have to precede a launch, period. because you have to have health and momentum before you go multi-site. Multi-site should be a response to that health and growth, but it's not a solution for creating health and growth.
Yes. Yes.
And I'll add, you should be a church with a minimum of 1,000 people attending on average, and that's kids, adults, students. And this is important because it's going to be critical to provide support for that new location while maintaining the strength at your sending location. And honestly, ideally, your church would be 2,000 or more before you launch a new campus. Just healthier. It's healthier when it's larger. I often use the healthy baby, right? We'd rather have a little bit bigger baby than a little one. They sleep better, they cry less. Just more is better in this category.
Well, and Amy, we found too, one of the most common factors for failed campus launches is they launch too small, right?
That's right.
And so having that robust, sizable team to be able to send out, I mean, you need more than 1,000 people attending at minimum.
Yeah. And you know, all of this data, it's just going to inform and it's going to point you towards what actions do we need to take right now to continue to move towards health before we launch. You know, that exercise we went through, I've just sent you another one, Sean, to have you put up. But this is a multi-site readiness checkpoint for a church I'm working with right now. And this church, they are so full. They don't have hardly any optimal seats left. They've maxed out their service times, and they really need a multiplication strategy, and that's what we're working on with them. But we went through this chart, and you can see they've got, I think, a lot of red. They aren't ready to go multi-site yet. They've even got some yellow. And having these conversations, like if you would have just looked at their attendance growth, you've just looked at some of their vital signs, you're like, you're ready. But when they go through this exercise, they recognize if we try to multiply right now through a multi-site strategy, we've got too many cracks in the system. We don't have enough readiness. And so out of that, they're channeling and funneling their work to be addressing these areas while looking at a different way to accommodate growth until they're actually ready to go multi-site. And it's just so smart to pause versus just plowing through just because of a space issue. You really want to take each of these metrics pretty seriously. So, you know, I always say, if you can step back and pay attention to what the data is telling you, you're going to have a healthier multi-site model when you launch.
Well, listeners, before we move on, I want to encourage you just to take a moment and make some notes in your workbook. Based on just all of the insights that Amy has shared here, how ready are you to launch a campus based on staff capacity? How ready are you to launch a campus based on current volunteer strength? Make a few notes in your workbook there. We'll give you about 30 seconds and then we'll be back with step 3. All right, Amy, let's finish up today's conversation with step 3, and this is all about the non-negotiables for launch. What would you say are the absolute non-negotiables for a healthy campus launch?
Yeah, well, let's start with leadership. The first non-negotiable is choosing the right person for the campus pastor role. This is absolutely critical, and it sets the tone for everything else you do. So you're, of course, looking for a leader, right? Someone who has the leadership gifting, but you're not looking for an entrepreneurial type wiring. And here's why. A campus pastor should be a second chair leader, right? Whose primary role is to envision this new location towards the mission of the church. We aren't looking for someone to start new things, come up with creative ideas, be entrepreneurial. That's always a hard word for me. We want someone.
It is for everybody.
Okay, good. It's not just me.
Yeah.
We want someone with great relational skills and influence and can help people at that new location take their next steps to look more like Jesus. And of course, the campus pastor also has to be 100% fit with your church's DNA, and that they not only believe in it, but they embody and champion your mission, your vision, your values, and your ministry strategies. There is nothing worse than having a campus pastor who wants to do things a little bit differently than what you've designed. So make sure you're assessing against those. And Sean, I would probably add they do need to be a great communicator. And I'm
Hmm.
not talking about being a teaching pastor, but I mean, if you think about it, a campus pastor typically only has a few minutes on the platform each weekend where they need to be able to communicate well and clearly and be compelling. Because again, they're trying to compel the people at their location to take their next steps. And maybe the last thing I'd say about the campus pastor is that ideally they should be on the team at least 12 months before you launch this new
Yeah.
location. Um, and by the way, even if they're on your team right now, we're talking about 12 months really carrying that campus pastor title, getting
Right.
ready to the launch, because that gives them time to build out their core team and champion a launch plan, which we're going to talk through here in a few minutes. So the first non-negotiable, you need to hire the right campus pastor. The second non-negotiable would be to launch your location where you're already reaching people. You want to
Hmm.
bring your church to where people who go to your church already live, where they already are, because that's going to be your core team, or at least some of it. And again, this is a key difference between multi-site and church planting. You plant churches in communities where you're not reaching people. You multi-site and put locations where people are already driving from for multi-site churches. And you do this because the people who are driving 15, 20 minutes to your church, now it's going to be in their community and
Yeah.
they can feel like I can invite my friends now. So that's an important
Absolutely.
one too.
And Amy, let me just add to that. I mean, you've said this several times already in today's webinar that people carry culture. And if you launch somewhere where you don't have people and you're starting with brand new
Mm-hmm.
people, no one carries your culture, right?
That's right.
Um, Let me add a non-negotiable to your list, and that would be to define what we call your ministry model. And that means you're moving from that oral tradition. We kind of tell about who we are. We talk about the DNA and who we are as a church. We're moving from that to actually a written tradition. So we're capturing those things, how we do ministry, our
Mm-hmm.
values, what's
That's right.
important to us all on paper. We often call that a playbook where each ministry defines how they do ministry. Here's what the wins look like. Sometimes we call it church in a box. It's something that you can hand to the campus pastor of this new location, and they now know that this is how they need to run the ministry that needs to be in place in time for a
Mm-hmm.
healthy church launch. So transitioning, clarifying your ministry model, but then moving that from that oral tradition. For years, maybe we've talked about it, to now we're actually capturing it in written form so that it is more portable and easily captured by our campus
Yeah.
locations.
And Sean, those are living documents, just like your decision rights, which we talked about a lot in the podcast. You're going to do your best job to write it all down. And then anytime there's something that happens that's a little outside the lines, as we grow as a multi-site church, we're just updating the content and making sure
Yeah.
everyone has clarity all the time on who we are as a
Yeah.
church.
Yeah. Well, Amy, we've been serving a really fantastic church in Athens, Georgia for many years, called Athens Church. Great name for them. And we recently helped them launch their first campus location. We had a chance to interview, you did specifically, the campus pastor of their new location, Stephen Soul, and just asked him about his launch experience. And we wanted to share some of his learnings and insights with you.
Yeah, Athens Church and Unstuck, we've worked together the past 6 years. Their church is 20 years old and located in the big football town of Athens, Georgia. Go Dogs, right? It's kind of funny because we started their multi-site planning back in 2019, and then we all know what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
So eventually they picked their multi-site plans back up. Stephen Sowell, they built a launch team. He was the campus pastor of 250 adults. And then they opened their doors in October of this past year and welcomed over 900 people. It was absolutely an amazing launch. And I kind of wish I would have been able to be there with them. But in my interview here with Stephen, I just asked him a few questions about what led to such a successful launch of their first multi-site location. So here's my conversation with Stephen. Well, Stephen, thanks for joining us today. You clearly had a successful launch of your first multi-site. And so I would just love to hear, what are the 3 or 4 things that you guys did that were just critical to a successful launch?
Yeah, Amy, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this. The first thing that comes to mind is the concept of a launch team. I honestly cannot even fathom trying to start this location without a launch team. And That came completely from the Unstuck process. We engaged with Unstuck way back in 2019 for a variety of different reasons. But honestly, the main driving force was we wanted to reach more people in our city. And we were trying to just get Unstuck's wisdom and guidance on, given where we were as a church, we'd been in one location for as long as we had existed. What do we do? How do we reach more people? And the multi-site strategy was just an answer that came out of that process. It was never the goal when we began the process. And so once we dug into that and we prayed and we knew this is the direction God was leading us, the launch team component of that, where we took 10% of our average adult attendance is what we did, 10% of our average adult attendance, and we recruited that number of people to come with us and to be a part of this new location. So that is the first thing I would say was a big, big success, was we had this launch team. The second thing was the location of the actual property. And when I think about that, you know, your team was really helpful in this as well. We have often heard for the last 25, 30 years that you needed to launch another location where the drive time was 25, 30, 35 minutes away because you were establishing that distance. Well, Unstuck actually helped us see that post-pandemic, people's orbit, the atmosphere at which they lived their life, it had shrunk greatly. And so wherever they were getting their groceries, wherever they were getting their gas, wherever their kids were going to school, all of the restaurants they were getting takeout from, all of that just shrunk considerably during the pandemic. And if your church isn't inside that orbit and you're the only thing outside of where they're doing life, it's probably worth considering putting a location in that circle. And that was a really big factor in the ultimate location that we chose, which is right in the center of Athens, Georgia, about a mile from the University of Georgia. And so this moves us deeper into the city. We're on the west side of town now, and we've been out here for a number of years, but this moves us deeper into the city, closer to the town that we love and call home.
I probably call the third success factor they chose the right campus pastor. But when Unstuck was walking alongside you as you prepared to launch, was there any counsel that surprised you? Like, were there things that you might have thought differently about if you had done it on your own?
Absolutely. I mean, the two biggest things, thinking about some of the counsel we got in this arena that you're talking about, one is the size of the staff when you launch another location. It was definitely the biggest question that I got from other staff members that I work with. I would meet with the Unstuck team and then go and report all the things I was learning from them. And time after time, the team was going, okay, let's talk about staffing. How big is it? Who needs to be on the team? How does this work? And what really surprised a lot of people was it's really not a large number of full-time staff that Unstuck encourages you to launch with. And Amy, I'm so glad we paid attention to that. We have 5 full-time equivalents on our team. We have some internship help when it comes to college students who interned with us. We have a residency program with some part-time help as well. But when you add all that together, we have 5 full-time equivalents. And it is definitely the number I would suggest somebody pay attention to. It does not need to be bigger than that. So that was one thing that surprised us, but in a good way, because we needed that guidance.
Yeah.
Amy, another thing that surprised us was just how serious Unstuck is about the identical model versus aligning everything to be identical with your sending location or not. And there's really no gray area in between. You either are aligning with everything when it comes to vision and mission and who you're reaching, or this is a new thing we're doing and we're just going to call that a church plant. And so many questions that we got from our church was literally the first question we would get is, well, who are the new people, the different people, the new sections of town that we're not reaching? Who are we going after with this new location? And we were going, look, we know who we're going after. We know who our target is. We know who God's gifted us to reach. And we're going to do that in this new section of town and align as closely as we can because we feel like that's what God's gifted us to do in this city. And doing something completely different would not be an expansion. It would be a planting of something brand new. And that's not the strategy we were using.
Those are great takeaways. So now you're 8 months into this new location. I'm wondering, like, what are the tensions now? What are the challenges now, 8 months into launch?
Absolutely. This is going to sound a lot, or is going to sound similar to probably many pastors out there and familiar, but engagement is a big challenge because we launched really strong with this group of people who have been part of our church for a number of years. So they have this DNA of what it looks like to serve, what it looks like to give, what it looks like to be a part of small groups. And we're coming up on, when we get to the new school year in the fall of 2025, we'll be coming up on almost a year of being our own location. And we know that when that happens, we're going to need to be ready to have new people who have onboarded to this mission through serving, through giving, through joining small groups. So I'm working really hard right now. Our team is working really hard on just creative ways we can get people to engage with us who have never been a part of our church before. The good news is, Amy, we're not siphoning off more and more people from our sending location. That's really good news. We started with a really strong core, but all of the new growth has been that. It's been new growth. So we're trying to just cast a lot of vision to those new people. We don't just have a desire for you to attend our church. You can attend as long as you need to and participate at the level that you want to, but eventually we want you to engage with this. We think this is the greatest mission on planet Earth, and we want you to engage with it, to serve, to give financially to it, to join a small group. So that's a big challenge right now that we're paying attention to. And then on our staff side, we're still, we're 2 locations. We don't have a central team yet. We're not quite ready for that yet. We don't think that's wise, and Unstuck has helped us in understanding when you need a central team versus when it might not be needed yet. And we're not there yet. So as a result, people who serve on the location team with me also have a lot of collaboration with the team that they used to work with on a more regular day-to-day basis. And it's a beautiful thing because I think the unity is really strong, but it's also clunky because you're trying to figure out, I used to sit in this meeting and I had a different role. Now I sit in the same meeting and my role is different. And that just takes time to work through. And I wouldn't recommend doing it any differently because I think it's good. I think that tension is good and it's brought a lot of good things. But it's definitely a challenge that we're trying to navigate for sure.
So you got a lot of people listening today that either feel multi-stuck or they're getting ready to launch their first location. So fresh off of your launch, do you have any parting words for them? Any encouragement?
Well, I would say just on the front end, all of the stress and hard work of launching, it is absolutely worth it on the back end because you're seeing new people there are people who weren't thinking about our church at all, who were living right here in this city. And all of a sudden, because we inserted ourselves into the orbit of their life, they're giving us a try. They're saying yes to an invitation of their neighbors. So if you're stuck or if you're curious about launching for the first time and you don't know if it's worth it, if God is leading you in that direction, I just want to tell you all of the stress of just navigating so many questions around alignment and expansion and everything that the Unstuck team's trying to do, it is worth it. Stick with it. And then secondly, I would say lean into what Unstuck is sharing. This is a group that is learning from all over the country, trends, things that are working, things that are not working, things that are outdated, new things on the horizon. Unstuck has helped our team immensely navigating all of this. I can't imagine doing it any differently. So I would just say lean into what Unstuck is sharing. And I think it's something that God wants to use in your church and in the life of your church down the road.
Well, a big thanks again to Stephen and to Athens Church for being willing to share a bit about their story today.
Yeah, I want to jump on the last thing that Stephen mentioned there about the team. I think it's pretty common, it's gardening season. I'm looking at my backyard here in Minnesota, and I think it relates to when you launch your first staff team to a new location. Up until this time, they've all been in one pot. And as in the spring as gardeners, we often separate our plants so we can grow 2 bigger plants. And commonly the plants go through a season of what I call root shock. They're just struggling to get used to their new environment. And I think this is what Stephen was describing. You have your kids pastor, for example, who's been a part of the kids team, historically. And now they're the kids pastor at the new location, and they have a new boss, the campus pastor, but they're still pretty attached to the kids team, right? Because that's what they're used to. But now they have this new number one team, and that's the campus team. And it's absolutely critical that the staff at the campus report to that campus pastor, because there's this new plant, right, that needs to work together to funnel its energy so it can throw and thrive and produce the right fruit. So back to the Athens journey, as Stephen said, you do need this strong core team, right? You need people who don't only sign up, but they show up. But building the core team is just one part of a successful launch. And this people side, it's a predictable outcome. So just to be ready for it and to anticipate and to lead your staff through, we're going through a change wheel as we begin to be one church in multiple locations. They often just need a little bit of coaching through that time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take this next part. I just kind of threw out there that the core team is an important part of launch, but let's pivot a little bit and talk through kind of a launch plan model to show everyone who's participating what it looks like. So I'm going to have you put up the chart, Sean, that we use when we're working with the church on their multi-site launch. It is placeholders, you can see, and it's incomplete, but we just pre-populate some things to at least get the conversation started, and then we adapt and refine the plans as we work with them. So you can see that it's broken down into 4 lanes of work and 4 phases of execution. And so for you on the phases of work, you've got obviously your staff and volunteer work that needs to get done. You've got your community and marketing work that needs to get done. You've got your venue and equipment work that needs to get done. And of course, admin and others, always that fun category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you look at the other, by the way, you can see that's where you build your financial plans. This is where you have maybe a generosity campaign. So again, they're on here so we can talk them through and we put them in the right ones. But phase 1 up there, if we look at the staff and volunteer lane, it works through, hiring the campus pastor, a prayer strategy. But as you work through it, you can see we're getting into holding core team meetings when we get to phase 2. Phase 3, we're hiring staff for this new campus, getting them onboarded. Even phase 4, we're continuing the training. If you just go down to venue and equipment, we've got to find phase 1, we've got to find our location. Phase 2 is more about getting things ordered or if there's renovations that have to happen. Phase 4, we're holding practice services. So I just put that up there because my point is it's not just about picking a building, building a team, and launching into your new multi-site location. There's lots of planning that's crucial, lots of preparation that's important, and really a staff that needs to be built and a team that needs to be envisioned to launch into multi-site. So I just don't want us to understate really what it takes to get ready. It's more comprehensive than probably what we can cover in a short webinar.
All right, well, we're about to move into our live Q&A portion of today's webinar. So take just a moment and submit any questions that you want to ask. If there's been something that's kind of brewing in your mind that you haven't had a chance to submit that, use the Q&A function on Zoom, submit those questions, and then Amy and I'll be back in just a minute to answer your questions live.